How'd you get broken in rough?
He got what he deserved. I gave it to him.
Oh.
Hounds.
There's a moment during the feast at Winterfell, the night after the Battle of the Long Night, after the dead have been burned and the living are drinking themselves into a stupor, where Sandor Clegane does something he almost never does. He smiles, not a snarl, not a grimace, a real, genuine smile, and the person who causes it is Sansa Stark, the girl he used to call Little Bird, the girl who couldn't look at his face without flinching, the girl he offered to save and who chose to stay behind. She sits down next to him. They exchange a few words about how she killed her husband, and the Hound, the man who has spent 8 seasons scowling at every human being he's ever met, breaks into a smile of pure, unmistakable pride. Now, most people remember this scene as a nice reunion moment, 2 characters who have history catching up after years apart. But if you look closer, if you trace the specific word that makes the Hound smile, you realize this scene is doing something much deeper than a catch-up conversation. Because the word that cracks the Hound's face open isn't a joke, it isn't flattery, it's a single noun. Sansa says, "Hounds." I mean, let's rewind and set this up properly. The Hound is sitting alone at the feast, as far from the celebrations as he can get without actually leaving the room. A northern girl approaches him, tries to flirt, and he growls her away. He doesn't want company, he doesn't want warmth. He wants his wine, and his corner, and his scowl. And then Sansa sits down. She says,
"Could have made you happy for a little while."
The Hound grunts something about only one thing making him happy, and that's his business. And then something remarkable happens. Sansa doesn't leave. She doesn't flinch. She holds his gaze. So, the Hound notices. He points out that she used to not even be able to look at him. And Sansa, without missing a beat, says, "That was a long time ago. I've seen much worse than you since then." And in those words, the entire history between these 2 characters collapses into a single sentence. Because Sansa isn't being cruel. She's being honest. The burned face that once terrified her is nothing compared to what she's survived since. Ramsay Bolton, Littlefinger, the Sept of Baelor, the army of the dead. She's looked at genuine horror, up close, and the Hound's scars have become the least frightening thing in her world. Look, the Hound tells her he's heard about what happened to her. He doesn't say Ramsay's name. He doesn't need to. Everyone's heard. And Sansa answers with a coldness that would have been unthinkable from the girl she was.
He got what he deserved. I gave it to him.
Not someone else gave it to him. Not justice was served. I gave it to him. First person, personal. She's claiming the kill. The thing is, the Hound asks how. And that question, that single word, how, is the door that opens the entire scene. Because when Sansa answers, she doesn't describe the execution. She doesn't explain the setup. She says one word, "Hounds," right? And the Hound smiles. Well, here's what that smile means, and why it matters more than almost any other expression in the entire final season. To understand it, you need to go back to the very beginning of the Hound and Sansa's relationship and trace what the word hound has meant to both of them across 8 seasons. Actually, when Sansa first arrives in King's Landing, the Hound terrifies her. He's massive, scarred, violent, and he follows Joffrey around like a weapon on a leash. Joffrey calls him Dog. The court calls him the Hound. He is, in every sense, defined by the animal his family is named for. A loyal, vicious, obedient attack dog trained to bite whatever his master points at. And Sansa, beautiful, naive, sheltered Sansa, can barely look at him. His burned face repulses her. His bluntness confuses her. She's a little bird in a cage, and he's the biggest, ugliest hound in the kennel. But here's what most people forget. The Hound is the first person in King's Landing who is genuinely kind to Sansa. Not kind in the way Cersei is kind, with agendas and poison behind the smile. Kind in the way that matters. When Joffrey forces his Kingsguard to beat Sansa in open court, the Hound is the one who offers her his cloak to cover herself afterward. A small act of decency from the last person you'd expect it. When the mob attacks during the riot in King's Landing, and men try to rape her. The Hound is the one who fights through the crowd and carries her to safety. He doesn't do it for money. He doesn't do it for position. He does it because something about this little bird reminds him that there are still innocent things in the world, and he's spent his whole life failing to protect them. And then comes the night of the Blackwater. The wildfire is burning. The city is falling. The Hound, broken by his fear of fire, deserts. He goes to Sansa's room. He offers to take her north, to Winterfell, to safety. He'll protect her. He'll get her home. And Sansa says no. She stays behind in the nightmare. The little bird chooses the cage over the Hound. Basically, that rejection haunts the Hound for years. You can see it in the way he talks about Sansa to Arya on the road. He tells Arya he saved Sansa from the mob. He says it with something close to tenderness, which for the Hound might as well be a love letter. And when Arya doesn't believe him, he says, "Ask your sister if you ever see her again." The Hound failed to save Sansa, not because he wasn't strong enough, but because she wouldn't let him. And the years between that night and their reunion at Winterfell are filled with the consequences of her choice. You see, Sansa endures everything the Hound was trying to protect her from. Littlefinger manipulates her. The Boltons use her. Ramsay does things to her that the show barely depicts and the audience can barely watch. She is beaten, raped, imprisoned, and humiliated by a man whose cruelty makes Joffrey look like an amateur. And through all of it, through every night in that room, through every scar Ramsay leaves, Sansa is quietly becoming something she never was before. She's becoming dangerous. She's learning, not sword fighting, not water dancing. She's learning how people work, how power works, how cruelty works, and most importantly, she's learning how to use it. And then she feeds Ramsay to his own dogs. Again, think about the specificity of that execution. Sansa doesn't hang Ramsay. She doesn't behead him. She doesn't have him burned or flayed or thrown from a tower. She locks him in a kennel with his own hounds, the animals he used to hunt and terrorize people, and she watches them eat him alive. She uses his own weapon against him. She turns his dogs into her instruments of justice. And the last thing Ramsay hears before the teeth reach his face is Sansa's voice telling him that his name will be forgotten, his house will disappear, and everything he was will be erased. The thing is, now fast forward to the feast at Winterfell. The Hound asks how she killed Ramsay, and Sansa says, "Hounds, not dogs, not his dogs. Hounds." The same word the world uses for Sandor Clegane, the nickname he's carried his entire life, a name that was given to him as an insult, as a way of saying you're nothing but an animal, a tool, a weapon, without a soul. And Sansa has taken that word and turned it into justice. And yet, there's an even deeper layer that makes the Hound's smile land so hard, because the Hound offered to be Sansa's protector, her hound, essentially, and she refused. She chose to walk through the darkness alone. And on the other side of that darkness, she emerged as someone who doesn't need a hound to protect her anymore. She commands hounds. She weaponizes them. The girl who was once afraid of a man called the Hound now uses hounds to destroy the men who hurt her. Now, that transformation is exactly what the Hound recognizes when he smiles. It's not amusement, it's pride. The same pride a teacher feels when a student surpasses them. The Hound spent his whole life being called an animal, being treated like a weapon, being pointed at people and told to kill. And Sansa, the one person he ever tried to save through genuine kindness, took the thing the world used to degrade him and turned it into power. When she says hounds, she's not just describing how Ramsay died. She's telling the Hound, without saying it, that the word the world used to diminish him is the word she chose for her justice. You know, what follows the smile is almost as important. The Hound says, "You've changed, little bird," and then none of it would have happened if you'd left King's Landing with me. He's not gloating, he's grieving. He's saying, "I could have spared you all of that, And Sansa's response is the most powerful thing she says in the entire final season. She tells him, calmly, clearly, without self-pity, that without Littlefinger and Ramsay, without all of it, she would have stayed a little bird all her life. Technically, that line closes the entire arc between these two characters. In the beginning, the Hound called her Little Bird because she was one, repeating the pretty words the court taught her, singing the songs Cersei wanted to hear, trapped in a cage built by people more powerful than her. And now she's telling him that the cage, the horror, the abuse, the suffering, is what broke the bird out. She's not a little bird anymore. She hasn't been for years. She's the Lady of Winterfell. She's the woman who fed a monster to his own dogs. And the Hound, who has been calling her Little Bird since the first season, hears that name for the last time and knows it doesn't fit anymore. So the Hound smiles because Sansa used hounds to take her power back. He smiles because the word the world used to reduce him is the word she chose for her weapon. He smiles because the girl he couldn't save didn't need saving. She needed suffering, and she used it to forge herself into something nobody could break. And he smiles because somewhere inside the man who spent his life being called a dog, there's a flicker of recognition. Maybe being a hound isn't an insult after all. Maybe it's the most dangerous thing you can be. So the next time you watch this scene, Sansa sitting next to the Hound at that feast, the firelight on both their faces, her calm against his roughness, watch for the smile. It lasts less than a second, but it contains everything. 8 seasons of history, a rejected offer, years of suffering, a word reclaimed, and one scarred, bitter, beautiful man realizing that the little bird he tried to rescue flew further than he ever could.